I mean, it's fascinating to discover these things of the past, people who have contributed to my life, who I don't even know who they were or what they've contributed to me. I've learned some fascinating things along the way, the things that you can inherit from your parents and your grandparents, which I didn't realize. Some things like post-traumatic stress can be passed down through the genes and affect subsequent generations. Various health conditions can be passed down through the genes as well. But also, as I've looked at this ancestry, I've thought about different people, I've seen different people, just names, and I've wondered and imagined who they might be and how they lived and how the choices that they made in their lives might have affected their children and affected their children and have affected me. One of those that I'm very aware of is that my mother's direct female line goes back to a group of French Protestants who fled France because of religious persecution and ended up in South Africa. And were very, very committed to maintaining this, as Joshua says, choose who you will serve, you and your children. And very important for them to pass that heritage on to their children and to their children's children. And I think part of that is what I have inherited through those choices of those people who are just names on a page to me. Looking backwards is so important, but it can be very dangerous as well. Remember Lot's wife turned into a pillar of salt when she turned back and looked backwards. I've discovered some dodgy ancestors when I've been looking backwards, people who I'd rather not have in my family tree and not be connected to. And one time I was driving and I was, you know, when you get to the intersection of the slipway and you've got to look backwards to see if there's any traffic coming and you're merging. And I was looking backwards and I looked forward and the car that was in front of me that was going had all of a sudden stopped. You've been in those situations. Fortunately, I didn't keep going as well. I had enough time to stop behind them. So it is dangerous to look backwards. We need to look backwards sometimes so that we can move forwards. Joshua, in this moment, gathers the people together. Notice in Shechem, which is up in the north. And he gathers the people together and he reminds them of their heritage, their family tree. And he says, remember Terah. Now, Terah was Abraham's father who started a journey. He started this journey and he got to a place where his son died, and it's almost like that trauma got him stuck in that place. And he never completed that journey. He never fulfilled that which, I'm not sure if it was God that was leading him on that. We don't have a lot of information on that. We just know Terah left Ur, and when he got up to this northern part, just in Turkey, and where they made a U-turn to come down into the promised land, Terah stopped there and stayed in a place called Haran. And he had a son called Haran who died in that place. It was like that situation. He couldn't move on from that moment. And it was up to Abraham then to leave his family and leave that place that had become home to him to move on with the journey. In obedience, he chose to obey. Not just chose to love God in theory, but actually to put that into practice and begin to move forward again on the call of God, to the commitment that he had made, to that voice that he'd heard saying, go and I will show you. Not here's where you're going, but go, and as you're going, I'll show you along the way. That's pretty scary, isn't it? That's like step out in faith, move forward. And as Joshua gathers the people together, he says, take care to teach the next generation. Tell them about the story of where you've come from and where God is leading us. That passing on this knowledge, this information, this sense of commitment to the Lord is something that doesn't happen automatically. Sometimes we kind of hope that our kids will just pick up what we pick up the examples. Ruben, thanks for talking about the the example and the role models that people in the church have been. That is so important for us to be a community for our children, to be the examples. But we also need to give explicit teaching to these young people. I'm being challenged that perhaps I haven't spent as much time as I ought to with my boys, telling them the details of what sits in the manual of the Church of the Nazarene. What it means to be Nazarene, what it means to follow Jesus, what the various aspects are of us as a community, and the things that we value are important. They're not just going to pick that up because I know it. I actually have to sit with them. Ruben, this afternoon, we're sitting down with the manual. We're going to read through it. Discipleship is very important. When Jesus calls his disciples together, he says, go and make disciples and teach them to obey everything that I've commanded you. In Psalm 78, in our call to worship, did you notice there was that idea of teaching this story to your children so that they'll be able to teach it to their children? And so the story gets passed down and continues on. So Joshua gathers the people together and he reminds them of where they've come from. Remember where you've gone. But not just looking backwards. You look backwards and you remember so that you can move forward. Joshua challenges the people to make their own choice. Abraham, Isaac, Terah made choices that have affected who we are. But now it's your turn to make a choice. What will you choose? He says, choose this day who you will serve. Don't put it off till tomorrow. Don't forget about what's happened yesterday. Choose this day who you will serve. There's something about the choices that we make in this very present moment that shape who we are. Sometimes we make choices, though, by not making choices. We kind of, delay it. We'll put it off. And we end up just getting swept along with the current of culture, with the friends that we choose, and our friends just dictate to us where we go and what we do and what is important to us. Or we get caught up in the latest trends and the latest fashions that are going without stopping and making a choice and thinking, what am I doing here? Really challenged by the Freedom Hub when they came and spoke to us about the ethical choices that we make in shopping. You know, when you go down to the shops, you don't often think about the products that you're buying, but how are we contributing to exploitation in the world when we're buying products from those places? So, I mean, it's hard, isn't it, to be able to be aware all the time of everything and make all those good choices. But we need to inform ourselves. We need to be always looking forward, remembering where we've come from. I came across this quote by Saint Cyprian, who was Bishop of Carthage back in the old days, 210 to 280 AD that he lived. Not 1910, 210. And he said, whatever a person prefers to God, that they make a god to themselves. Whatever you value more than God becomes your God. All of us have values. All of us have priorities in our lives. And that which is the top of the list is our God. You might think that this is a bit extreme, but there's a powerful truth behind this statement. When we choose to go to the movies rather than come to church, we're starting to show where our values are. When we choose things that the things that we know are important to God, we're putting other values above God. I guess one time is okay, but sometimes the one time becomes twice, becomes 3 times, and after a while, without knowing it, our little choices have added up to make a big choice away from God. And we look at ourselves and go, how did I get here? One choice at a time. Our choices matter because they establish habit patterns in our lives. And as we make those choices, we either honor God with our choices or we are distracted from God. Our choices shape who we are. And the irony is that who we are shapes our choices. Joshua challenges the people to recognize the choice that they are making on that day. This is a very big, very obvious choice that they were making. And these classic words that Joshua stands before the people and says, you make your decision, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. I love how he chooses for his whole household. You people in my household, you don't have a choice. This is the way it's going to be. And all the people around him respond, we will serve the Lord. And Joshua says, no, you won't. I always imagine, at this moment, if there was an altar call, and it said, all those who will serve the Lord, come to the front of the church, getting up out of your seat, coming forward, the preacher says, go and sit back down, you're not serious about the choice that you're making. I've never seen that in an altar call. I've never seen that happen. We're all too eager to get people forward and get them signed up. But as you're coming forward, stop. Think about what you're doing. You do not have the capacity to follow through on what you are saying at this moment. Go back down, sit down, think about what you're doing. My friend Cyprian had to make some choices in his life. He was Bishop of Carthage, and there was a persecution that happened in the time. People in Carthage, Christians in Carthage, were kind of wasn't so sure about this guy because he very quickly rose up the ranks in the church. Very soon after he was converted, he took on leadership and became of the area. And when this persecution came, I don't know if it because he wasn't a Christian for a long time, but he felt that he needed to go into hiding. And he got criticized for that because in this face of potential execution, he chose to hide rather than face the authorities. To be honest, I think I would be there with him, hiding. There's bravery and there's stupidity. But he was criticized for fleeing. But his reasoning was that the faithful would need a shepherd during the time of persecution. If he was executed, who would lead the people? I'm thinking, how do you lead the people when you're kind of hiding away? Somehow he did it. But he weathered that storm, and the persecution came and went. And a few years later, though, the church faced another wave of persecution. And this time, when he was confronted, sacrifice to the Roman gods or forfeit your life, he refused. Basically standing before the Roman authorities saying, as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. And he was executed for that stand that he took to serve God. I'm not sure what happened between the first wave of persecution, where he went into hiding, feeling like he needed to save his life so that he could lead the church, and the second where he said, I'm not going to hide from this, I'm going to face it, and I know it's going to cost me my life. But in my death, there will be a witness to God. Most of us will not be called to make that kind of a stand for God, not that extreme. But life could get rough because of the stand that we take for God. Sometimes that stand that we need to take is against ourselves. I'm on the diet thing again, and I'm needing to take a stand against myself and say no to that box of chocolates that is sitting in the cupboard. Sometimes it's easy to say no to other people, but when you have to say no to yourself, that is difficult. Joshua says, you cannot serve the Lord. You don't have it in you. God is holy. The standards are too high. You've already compromised in what you're doing. They were standing in Shechem. Shechem was in the northern part of Israel. That area hadn't been fully conquered. There were still Amorites in the land. And in that passage he says, choose this day, are you going to serve the gods from Egypt, or are you going to serve the gods of the people who are living among you? There weren't supposed to be anyone left living among them. They had already compromised in this place. Where will that compromise lead them in the future? As I looked at this idea of, God is holy, you cannot live up to the standard that God wants, it challenged me. Because I know that it's not about the list of do's and don'ts that we fulfill that gives us acceptance before God. That is not what holiness is. Holiness isn't about a list of performances. It's not about the choices that we make. It's about the person who we are. But the person who we are shapes the choices that we make. And the choices that we make shape the person who we are. It is about the relationship that we have with God. And as we are filled, as we grow in that relationship with God, it becomes natural for us to make the choices that are in line with the relationship that we have with God. So we say with Israel, no, we will serve the Lord. And we're challenged to put off the foreign gods among us. What are those things that are close to us that are going to be snares, that are going to be traps for us? I know that box of chocolates shouldn't be in the house. It's much easier to resist the temptation to have the chocolates if they're not in the house at all. So what are those things that are around us that are going to trip us up? We live in a secular world with a lot of pressures around us. Constant temptation to take those things and if not put them above God, they're like pretty close to that. What are the priorities that dull us to what God is doing in us and around us? We need to be prepared for those moments. We need to remember to look forward. These 10 bridesmaids, the story is quite confronting and even confusing. And if you begin to overanalyze the story, it gets a bit tense. The overall thrust of the parable says, remember to look forward. Be prepared in that moment. Keep awake. Jesus says at the end of that passage, keep awake therefore, because you never know the hour. One of the problems that I have with that is that all of them fell asleep. We think the wise bridesmaids and the foolish bridesmaids, but they all fell asleep, and Jesus says, stay awake. Nothing that we can do can predict when Jesus will return. Nothing that we can do can force the Spirit to move amongst the people that we walk amongst, that we so desperately want to see come to the Lord. Nothing that we can do can keep us awake beyond our physical capacity to stay awake. Sooner or later, we will fall asleep. But remember to look forward. Anticipate that God is at work. And so we prepare ourselves to be ready in that moment when somebody says to us, tell me about Jesus. I had this really strange encounter just sending something to Alex Ship the other day, and the person in the courier place started asking me all these questions about religion and about spirituality, and I felt somewhat unprepared to speak to him in that moment. I mean, never mind that every 5 minutes a customer came walking in and it was very disjointed, so I eventually said, look, here's my contact details, let's get together and have a sit down and chat about that. It's nothing that I could have prepared, nothing that I could have predicted that would have happened, but I need to be ready for those moments to be able to share about who God is. And it wasn't about having the right answers to his questions, but just being available and open to listen and to enter into conversation with him. We anticipate that God is at work, and so we evaluate the choices that we make now on their future impact. Will my choices have a meaningful impact on how I live my life moving forward? We anticipate that Christ will come again, and we live in a way not to get to heaven, but to live our life fully here and establish the life of heaven in ourselves now, and that life will transcend even death through worship, through wonder, through wisdom. And so we filter our choices through our Christian values of love and compassion and holiness. And as we remember to look forward, we anticipate that we're going to get sleepy and we're going to nod off. And we remember that there is an urgency to what we do. And so it is important for us to remember our community and be together and find support and find alternate perspectives on things and have someone nudge us when we're falling asleep during the sermon. We need that support. We need each other to stay focused, to remember our past so that we're able to move forward. So just as Joshua challenges the people of Israel to remember their past and prepare for their future, so we too need to make the choices that honor God. Those choices that we make today, I know all of you have chosen to follow Jesus. Now we need to make those choices that keep us following Jesus and growing in holiness, growing in wisdom, growing in our for Jesus in the communities that we live in. There is an urgency to make wise choices even today so that we're ready when we get the wake-up call tomorrow. Remember to look forward. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for the godly heritage that we can be a part of. And whether our ancestors